Today, we are looking at a narrative script that takes the viewer on a simulated, faster-than-light journey from Earth to the Andromeda Galaxy, ending at the supermassive black hole at its center. The opening establishes a compelling mission control narrative device that is practically abandoned until the very end, leaving the overall framing feeling disconnected.
Yeah, I noticed this structural gap immediately when reading through the materials. It's so jarring.
Right?
Because the script makes a really strong case for a simulated journey right up front. It literally opens with the line, "This is mission control, all systems online. Your mission is to travel to our neighboring galaxy, Andromeda."
Yeah, it basically hands the reader a flight helmet.
Exactly. It straps them into a very specific seat. And then, at the very end, as you approach the supermassive black hole, we get this line like, "We thought we lost you for a second there, welcome back."
But the middle is just empty.
Right. Looking at that vast middle section, which is roughly, 80% of the script, that localized framing just entirely disappears.
It really does. Imagine stepping into a highly engineered, high-stakes escape room.
Okay, I love this analogy already.
So, the heavy vault door slams shut behind you, right? A red light begins to flash, and a synthetic voice over the loudspeaker announces, "Your oxygen supply runs out in exactly 60 minutes."
Oh man, your heart instantly starts pounding.
Exactly, because you are completely immersed in the physical stakes of that environment. But then, the game master simply unlocks a side door, steps into the room with you, and casually walks you through the space like a museum tour guide.
Oh wow, yeah.
Just, quietly explaining the history of the wallpaper for the next 59 minutes until the buzzer sounds.
The tension just evaporates entirely.
Totally dawn.
But looking at the middle section right now, the author shifts into this omniscient documentary-style narration. Like, they spend all this time explaining the 2.5 million light-year distances and the trillion stars in Andromeda.
Right. It gets very educational.
Yeah, and I guess if you keep interrupting that silent majesty with blaring alarms and computer readouts, don't you risk ruining the poetic ambition of the piece?
I mean, maybe.
Because space is vast and quiet, and maybe the author felt that maintaining a tense operational tone would, distract from the sheer scales.
I understand the instinct to quiet the narrative down, to appreciate the void. I really do. But the method of traversing it in this specific script is mechanical.
Right. We're in a ship.
Yes. The reader's brain is promised an avatar, a pilot in a ship. When you drop the simulation, you lose the psychological anchor. We are promised a mission, but we are given a lecture.
That is such a good way to put it.
The immersion breaks because the reader no longer knows where they are standing to observe these trillion stars. The human brain, it really struggles to comprehend intergalactic space without a localized point of view.
Makes sense. So the suggestion here is to thread the operational reality and sensory feedback of the mission consistently throughout the journey. To maintain the immersive framing and build a cohesive narrative structure.
Exactly. Thread it all the way through.
We don't need to lose the poetry, but we need to experience it from inside the ship. We have to maintain the friction of travel. The reader needs to feel the cold glass of the viewport against the forehead.
Let's break down the mechanics of how to actually do that, because it's easier said than done.
For sure.
Looking closely at the section discussing intergalactic speed, the script currently says, "We're going to need a lot more speed now. The stars begin to rush past faster and faster."
Which is a highly passive observation.
Super passive. So, as an example of how to implement this operational threading when reaching these incredible speeds, the script could insert a brief navigational check-in.
Oh, I like that.
It doesn't need to be overwhelming at all, just a quick line from the ship's computer, or a crackle from mission control confirming the local group coordinates.
Yeah, and building on the idea of a localized point of view, we can utilize the ship's actual instruments as narrative tools.
How so?
Well, later in the script, the viewer passes the large Magellanic Cloud and then enters the outskirts of Andromeda.
Right.
Instead of just describing these as hazy, beautiful patches of light floating in the dark, the author should mention specific instrument readings. Have the narrator note an unexpected gravitational shear from the Magellanic Cloud.
Oh, that's great.
Or like a minor, inexplicable radiation spike as they cross the threshold into Andromeda's halo.
Functionally, doing that naturally foreshadows the final climax. It subconsciously trains the reader to associate this journey with physical danger.
Exactly. It's a setup.
If we've been getting minor updates on radiation and gravity all along, then the intense signal breakup at the event horizon feels like a logical, inevitable conclusion to a dangerous flight.
Right, rather than a sudden afterthought tacked onto a documentary.
Yes.
It keeps the viewers strapped into their seat.
It tells them, yes, space is beautiful, but you are currently hurtling through it in a very fragile machine that is actively resisting the environment.
Now, once you strip away the museum tour guide and force the reader to remain physically anchored inside this fragile ship, they are forced to look out the window.
Right.
And that shifts our focus from how they are traveling to what they are actually thinking about while traversing the void.
Which brings us to the next major point. The script relies on familiar cosmic perspective tropes that miss an opportunity to connect the underlying physics of the journey to its deeply emotional themes.
Yeah, the internal monologue.
Right, the internal monologue of the traveler goes straight to the insignificance of human conflict when compared to the vastness of the universe.
It's the classic trope.
The narrator reflects on humanity fighting over lines on maps, titles, money, pride, while surrounded by 2 trillion galaxies.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a moment.
Go for it.
Isn't this feeling of insignificance, this realization that our planet is just a speck of dust, the classic pale blue dot sentiment, isn't that a mandatory emotional beat for any deep space content?
I mean, people definitely expect it.
When I consume materials like this, my brain almost expects that philosophical grounding to remind me of the sheer scale of what I'm looking at. I feel like an audience might feel shortchanged if the author doesn't acknowledge how small we are.
I completely understand why you expect it, but that expectation is precisely why it falls flat in this specific context.
Really?
Yeah, the weakness isn't the emotion itself, it's the execution. The observation that we are so small and our fights are trivial is just a heavily overused trope.
That's fair.
It's literally the default setting for almost every space documentary produced in the last 40 years. By relying on that generic platitude, the script pulls the listener out of this highly specific, unique journey.
It's too generic.
Exactly. It essentially ignores the fascinating, terrifying actual physics the script just spent paragraphs setting up.
It turns active reading into passive skimming.
Yes!
The author has laid down some incredible scientific groundwork, establishing the staggering distances and speeds, but then abandons that bespoke reality for a cliche that we've all heard 100 times.
Right, so the suggestion is to tie the philosophical reflections directly to the specific astrophysical phenomena presented in the journal, specifically the concept of light speed travel and time delay.
Oh, that is such a cool angle.
We have to make the philosophy earned. We need to force the listener to grapple with the actual mechanics of the universe, rather than just nodding along to a familiar, comfortable sentiment.
Let's look at how to bridge that cognitive gap for the reader. The script mentions that Andromeda is about 2.5 million light.
Right.
It even briefly touches on the idea that looking across that distance means looking into the past.
But it fails to connect that literal fact to the philosophical takeaway.
It just leaves it hanging there?
Exactly. Instead of generalizing about human pride and lines on maps, focus the emotional moment entirely on that 2.5 million year light delay. The human brain struggles to comprehend deep time far more than it struggles with deep space.
Oh, for sure. It's mind-bending.
The narrator could reflect that as we look back toward the Milky Way from the dark gulf of intergalactic space. We aren't seeing our current trivial fights.
Right.
We aren't seeing borders or money or modern civilization. The light reaching our ship right now left Earth 2.5 million years ago.
Wow.
We are literally watching our planet long before modern humans ever built a single city, perhaps before Homo habilis even picked up a stone tool.
That framing completely changes the psychological weight of the scene. It's no longer just about feeling small in physical space. It's about feeling small in time.
Exactly.
The realization that our entire recorded history hasn't even begun to cross the void between these two galaxies is a much more profound, unsettling realization than just saying our arguments don't matter.
We can take that integration of physics and philosophy even further, too. The script mentions that the Milky Way and Andromeda are being pulled together by gravity and will eventually collide.
Right, the big merger.
That's a terrifying, monumental physical reality that is currently just stated as a trivia fact.
So instead of just calling Earth a fragile world in a vacuum, the author should connect that fragility to the impending collision.
Yes, grounded in the actual event.
The philosophical reflection could highlight that all of human history, everything we have ever done, everyone we have ever loved, is just a brief, silent flash in the time frame of these two merging giants.
Oof, that gives me chills.
Right? We are just a fleeting spark caught between two colliding oceans of fire.
Now, I could see an argument that leaning heavily into deep time and the inevitable destruction of our galaxy makes the narrative too bleak for a general audience.
It is pretty dark.
But I would argue it makes it sublime. It takes the specific physics of this specific journey and uses them to generate genuine awe, rather than borrowing unearned awe from previous media.
Stripping away those generic tropes and forcing the reader to reckon with deep time and literal galactic collisions leaves them in a highly vulnerable emotional state.
Very vulnerable.
And that vulnerability is exactly what you need to exploit for the final physical destination of the piece.
Which is a perfect transition. The pacing of the final descent into Andromeda's core accelerates too quickly, causing the climactic encounter with the supermassive black hole to lose its intended weight.
Yeah, it really sneaks up on you.
Let's look at the mechanical breakdown of this pacing. For the vast majority of the piece, the viewer is drifting through the expansive, quiet void. We get these long, sweeping, almost lyrical descriptions of the local group, the large Magellanic Cloud, the 2 trillion galaxies.
All very slow and methodical.
But then suddenly, the script says, now you're inside Andromeda, right ahead is the core, hidden in the center is the supermassive black hole.
The transition from peaceful drifting to extreme gravitational violence happens in a handful of sentences.
It gave me whiplash.
When I was reading this, my brain was lulled into a slow, rhythmic alpha state by all those long, sweeping descriptions of the void. So when the script suddenly dropped the most destructive force in the universe into my lap in one sentence, I didn't feel awe.
What did you feel?
I just felt confused, like I had skipped a page in a book.
Could the suddenness be a deliberate stylistic choice, though? Perhaps the author wanted it to feel abrupt, to emphasize how black holes lurk unseen in the dark.
Like a jump scare.
A jump scare, essentially. Yeah, to jolt the reader out of that alpha state.
I can see the attempt at that logic, but in text, pacing dictates physical size and importance. Word count literally translates to scale in a reader's mind.
That is so true.
If you spend 500 words on the empty space between galaxies and 30 words on the supermassive black hole, the reader's brain interprets the empty space as the main event and the black hole as a minor footnote.
It totally robs the black hole of its suspense and its terrifying scale.
Exactly. It's like floating down a lazy, winding river for hours and then suddenly dropping over Niagara Falls without any warning rapids.
So the suggestion is to restructure the final act to build tension gradually, using the increasing density of Andromeda's core as a series of escalating physical barriers before the final reveal.
Build the rapids.
Yes, build the rapids. We need to wade into the deep water step by step. The environment needs to become increasingly hostile, serving as a physical manifestation of the emotional vulnerability we just established.
To execute this pacing shift effectively, the author needs to break the final approach into 3 distinct, slower zones.
Okay, what's zone 1?
First, describe navigating the blinding, crowded starlight. The script currently mentions that stars are packed tightly in the core, but we need to feel the operational friction of that.
Right, like we talked about earlier.
Navigation becomes nearly impossible. The sheer density of light washes out the ship's sensors. It's a claustrophobic wall of blinding white.
That is brilliant, because it inverts the dynamic of the whole trip. We just spent the entire journey terrified of the endless dark, and now we are terrified of the overwhelming light.
It's a total sensory overload zone.
Okay, so once the reader is disoriented by the light, move to the second zone. Introduce the noticeable, terrifying shift in gravity.
The physical pushback.
Right. The script briefly mentions gas and dust spiraling and heating up. The author needs to expand on this and make it a literal physical barrier. The surrounding gas is being superheated into a massive ring of fire.
Oh, I can picture that.
The ship is violently vibrating. The radiation alarms are finally screaming, which, by the way, completely pays off that mission control framing we fixed in the very first critique.
It brings it all full circle. The friction is peaking, the operational reality of the ship is buckling under the weight of the environment.
And then we hit the third zone, the reveal.
Finally, slow the narration down significantly for the reveal of the event horizon itself. Let the bizarre physics breathe.
Yes, give it room.
The script has some fantastic imagery hidden. Space being stretched around something that refuses to be seen, light bending into curves, pulled into strange shapes. Right now, it flies by a breakneck speed.
It's over in a flash.
The author must slow this down. Let the listener fully process the gravity of staring at the missing piece of the universe. Let the bending of light and the warping of space be an agonizingly slow, hypnotic moment before the signal finally cuts out.
By creating those three distinct zones, the blinding stars, the violent gravity, and the warped physics, you turn a sudden jump scare into a creeping, inevitable descent.
You give the black hole the structural weight and the word count it deserves.
It transforms from a sudden plot point into a true, inescapable climax.
You know, the mechanics of these three critiques actually feed directly into each other in a deeply satisfying way.
They really do.
If you maintain the localized mission control framing, you give the reader an avatar, which gives you the vehicle to report the changing physics.
Right.
If you anchor the philosophy in those literal physics, the listener's mind is forced to grapple with deep time, leaving them intellectually primed for the bizarre reality of the black hole.
And if you pace the climax through those escalating zones, the final loss of signal feels terrifying, earned, and profoundly heavy.
It transforms the piece from a passive, wandering observation into an active, escalating, and ultimately overwhelming experience.
The raw potential of the imagery in this material is absolutely stellar. The descriptive language is already doing so much heavy lifting.
Oh, the bones are great.
Yeah, by just tightening the structural bolts, maintaining the framing, grounding the philosophy in reality, and pacing the climax, this journey will become unforgettable.
To briefly recap our analysis today, first, carry the operational mission control framing continuously through the middle of the journey so the viewer remains psychologically anchored in the simulation.
Spot on.
Second, elevate the philosophical takeaways by abandoning generic tropes and instead anchoring those moments to the specific physics of the journey, utilizing the cognitive weight of light speed delay and galactic collision.
Make it earned.
And third, slow down the pacing of the climax, breaking the descent into Andromeda's core into distinct, escalating zones to give the supermassive black hole its proper structural weight.
We highly encourage the author to implement these actionable suggestions and submit their revised work back to the critique for another review.
Because ultimately, you don't want your audience to feel like they are just listening to a museum tour guide explaining the history of the wallpaper.
Definitely not.
You want them trapped in the room, watching the timer tick down, staring into the dark, and feeling the very fabric of space warp around them.